Since the last episode of this series, I've had some more explanation given to me about how the last few updates to SRB2 have worked, and whether the new sprites were added as part of one of them. Initially, SRB2 v2.2.12 came out, and soon after Motorola and Twitter sent out images of the new sprite for the vanilla characters, which all look great. But then, v2.2.13 came out much sooner than expected, supposedly to fix some major bugs. I didn't experience them myself, but it seems they were pretty high priority problems. So now, the character sprites that were originally coming out in v2.2.12 that were pushed back to v2.2.13 due to coding problems will now be coming out in v2.2.14. I hope that makes sense for everyone. For now though, let's get back into covering the vanilla characters of SRB2. This time we'll be covering Sonic's biggest fangirl, Amy Rose. Let's get into it. First things first, I have to say it's a bit difficult reviewing Amy because I have absolutely no idea what type of character she is. In every game ever made that has different characters that aren't just skins, regardless of genre, characters will all fit into types, categories, archetypes, classes, whatever term you want to use, which give a general indicator of how you're expected to use them. Obviously, entire genres are built around this type of game design, like hero shooters, fighting games and RPGs, but even SRB2 sort of has this. Sonic is incredibly fast but is forced to stay grounded most of the time and is stuck on the default path. Tails is slower but has more vertical freedom, but he's still a bit restricted with where he can go. Knuckles is probably the character who has the least restrictions with where he can go, but he is also by far the slowest and clunkiest on the roster. The other two characters we're covering have probably the most well-defined categories of all, but Amy? I can't really say, so let's try and figure it out. First off, let's look at how her general movement works. In comparison to other characters we've covered so far, Amy is the second who is very different to the norm when just running around. While Knuckles is a lower jump than the norm, Amy has a higher one, which allows her to make certain jumps others cannot, sometimes skipping platforming sections or even big shortcuts where paths intersect close to one another. It's also better to jump higher than you're used to over jumping lower than you're used to, because it means your flow isn't as easily ruined by something like the Green Flower Mountain Act 1 beginning monitor. That is the exact moment I disavowed playing Knuckles, if you're wondering. Much bigger than that though is how Amy is much more vulnerable than the rest of the cast has been thus far. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles can all roll, which means they can both enter small crawl gaps in levels and will automatically damage objects when jumping. Amy cannot roll, which means he cannot enter small gaps, and she has no damaging jump. This ends up inspiring how Amy has to traverse levels and how her moveset has been designed, because these are problems that would otherwise make her more than just more difficult to play, but rather unable to complete the game. As such, she has two abilities, both related to a Pico Pico hammer. Pressing spin on the ground will cause you to come to a sliding halt, during which Amy will slam the hammer into the ground to create a small shockwave, destroying enemies, spikes, monitors, and most importantly, breakable floors. This is how you access Amy's character exclusive paths, being the second character in the roster to really have them, during which you'll end up needing to destroy spikes and boost springs to carry on. This is the other main utility to this ability, as using it on any spring, regardless of colour, will boost it, causing it to launch you higher and further than it otherwise would. Outside of her character exclusive paths, where there'll often be very high walls you can only surpass using this, boosting springs otherwise doesn't actually come up that often, as most other springs will be calibrated for Sonic, so boosting them will usually launch you into much further than expected, often making you miss the next spring in a chain, or throwing you into a death pit, or even just to a lower part of the level. To deal damage while in the air, it once again comes around to pressing spin, at which point Amy will perform a roll while swinging her hammer, damaging enemies during the few frames it lasts. It makes it really strategic when trying to hit enemies, as you'll often end up over or undershooting it due to how narrow the timing is and get hit by the enemy. I don't necessarily mind that. It's kinda like in a Souls game where you use your iframes to phase through attacks, just in reverse. What I'm less enthusiastic about is the range of the attack. SRB2 is for the most part pretty good with making sure hitboxes line up with sprites in a way that works without being too big or too small, but this attack is a rare exception. Not only does it have no extending hitbox around the hammer, so you do need to be accurate with your jumps, but you also need to be a lot closer to an enemy than it really looks like you should need to, which also ends up with you missing attacks a lot with how short the range is. It feels a bit like having your cake and eating it, as I don't mind how short the animation is, I'll get to in a sec, but I think it actually works to what I think the slightly hidden intended archetype Amy Rose fits into. But for that to work, the animation needs to line up properly. As it is, I think it currently just gives you a damage and jump identical to almost every other character, whereas the animation looks like it should be more of an insta-shield kind of situation. With that in mind, I think Amy Rose does fit into a category, just not quite as obviously or definitively as everyone else. I think she functions almost as a hard mode for Sonic, with her being a fast but oftentimes grounded character. Think about it, boss battles are made harder due to the lack of an automatically damaging jump, her character exclusive routes are oftentimes harder than the default path, and she lacks a thock or equivalent momentum boosting ability to avoid platforming with. Both of her abilities are just to counteract her weaknesses, and her only true strength is a higher jump and I believe a faster acceleration. In that, I think she actually does a really good job. She isn't obscenely underpowered to the point she's no fun. The accommodations for her flaws stop her from being nothing more than the weaker Sonic, and she's still able to be used at a high level in a unique way. And honestly, outside the short range of her aerial attack, which might also just be due to my complete lack of accuracy or timing, I don't think she has any other major flaws. She's just a harder version of a character that was already well executed, but still has a feel all of her own. That doesn't quite extend to her sprites though, as I'm just really not a fan of them. They're not particularly poorly executed, I've just never really liked anything about classic Amy Rose, from her animations to her overall design. I think the combination of pink, green, orange, blue, white and red is overbearing and busy. As much as I understand that Amy's entire personality is to be as girly of a girl as physically possible, with hearts and pink, yippee! I still can't stand her overbearingly cutesy animations, especially when others seem to be modified Sonic ones, who has a significantly more edgy attitude which causes those sprites to stand out. That all being said, I think Amy has a few nice animations, especially her idol one, and looking at the preview of the upcoming character sprites, I think any problems I had with the execution of the sprites will be negated. Her hands will have fingers, her quiff will look less muddled, her skin tone will be more saturated, her quills will be less floppy, her dress will be more poofy? Again, the sprites and animations are already fairly good and will only get better in future updates, but it's the fact that I just don't like classic Amy's design that drags this section down. Overall, Amy Rose is a well-executed character who initially seems to defy classification. Even when a category has been found, being effectively a more difficult Sonic for more experienced players, she brings a unique feel that stops her from being a retread of what you've already experienced. I don't think her music can really be improved that much, and while I was fairly harsh with her design, the actual sprite work is pretty good, though not the best we've seen so far. The math doesn't quite math with this final ranking, but I'm going to give her a 7. Really good, and the appeal of having a genuinely good jump in SRB2 cannot be understated. If you have problems with that overall score not quite making sense, make your own goddamn YouTube channel and do your own ranking system for your own opinions. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.